Well, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, yes it is, and that means it's time for another Food for Thought Friday. Well, if you don't already know, I've got a passion for bridging the gap between scholarly research, specifically in the behavioral sciences, and real-world, real-life, practical application. And today, we are looking at culture. Now, many organizations say that they care about culture. We have culture surveys, we've got people in culture departments, we've got culture managers, and yet, have you ever stopped to wonder, how exactly do we define culture? And I think one of the best definitions that I've heard goes something like this. Culture is the collective programming of the human mind that distinguishes the members from one human group from those of another. Culture in this sense is a system of collectively held values. And that definition is taken from an article by Geert Hofstede, and the article was called Culture and Organizations, and it appeared in the Journal of International Studies of Management and Organization. And somewhere here, as I like to do, I'll put a screenshot of that first page of the article somewhere there on the screen. Now, I like this definition because it's clean, it's neutral, and it allows us to talk about culture in a way that's non-threatening, non-normative. It's descriptive, it's not prescriptive. It's about what is, not about what ought to be. And this keeps us out of the area of that can quickly become landmines for personal and positional conflict and polarization. Okay. So now that I've defined culture, I think it's safe to say that every group that you will ever be a part of will always have some specific culture. Families have a family culture, we know that. Specific towns have a specific culture unique to that town. Cities have a culture unique to that city. If you travel abroad, you know that countries, nations, and even more small provinces and states all have their own unique culture. And this is not about right, and it's not about wrong, it's simply about different, and it's about unique. Because when we look at a company culture, we can't ignore the fact that companies consist of people, and people live in families, and families live in towns and cities are nested in provinces and provinces and states are nested in nations and countries. And so when we look at this nested paradigm of culture, things become more nuanced than simply talking about organizational culture. Why? Because culture is the way that things are done, and that is determined by the people who make up the organization. So today, we're looking at national culture. However, we must address the nested paradigm that is organizational culture. The organization consists of people who live in families, who live in towns, who live in provinces and states, who live in nations. Okay. Now, this isn't about stereotypes. It's not about broad, sweeping statements. Okay. Rather, it's grounded in decades of research by Dutch social psychologist Geert Hofstede, who was employed to examine culture at IBM. Okay. And he detailed his findings in this great book, Culture and Organizations, Software of the Human Mind. Now, according to Hofstede, there's 5 cultural dimensions that operate at the national level and also show up in organizations. And these operate on a sliding scale, and they are number 1, power distance. And that's low or high power distance. And that is how comfortable people are with unequal power. Strengths to a high power distance culture include clear authority, you know who's in charge. Clear decision making, you know the one who makes the decisions, and respect for expertise. High power distance cultures also come with a risk, and they include silence instead of feedback. You're not likely to go to your boss with feedback or dissent. Bad news often travels slowly or not at all, and innovation can often get stuck at the bottom. Within that context, here's the management takeaway. Explicitly invite dissent. Say when, say how it's safe to challenge decisions. Don't assume that people will just speak up. Because in high power distance cultures, or in companies that employ high power distance individuals, an open door philosophy will not always have the impact that you hope that it will have. That's power distance. Number 2, individualism versus collectivism. It's the me versus the we. The strength of individualistic cultures or individuals, the strength is accountability and initiative. The risk of individualism is competition and siloing. It's all about me, it's not about we. The strength of collectivism, either as an organizational culture or individuals from that national culture. Collectivism values loyalty and collaboration. The risk of collectivist culture is groupthink, right? False consensus and the avoidance of conflict. Right? And as we go through, I want you to think about how these show up in your organization. What are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, and what's the management takeaway? The management takeaway for individualistic versus collectivistic cultures, or individuals from those national cultures. Here's what you do as a manager. You align rewards with behaviors that you want. If collaboration matters, don't only praise and incentivize the lone wolf. Design both group and individual incentives. The third one, I told you there's 5. Number 3, competence versus care. Company cultures, or individuals from national cultures that value competence-driven culture. Competence versus care. The competence-driven culture, performance-focused. Highly performance-focused. Right? Again, this isn't about good and bad. Both of these are probably necessary to a greater or lesser degree in every company to survive, but it's how do you manage around the dynamic. So strengths of competence-driven cultures, performance focus. Risk of competence-driven cultures, burnout, fear of failure. Okay? Strengths of care-driven cultures, trust, work-life balance. Risk of care-driven cultures. And you find this a lot in social service organizations. Risk of care-driven cultures, avoidance of tough conversations. Right? We care so much about our people that we can't possibly broach the tough conversations. Okay? Very typical of those types of environments. So here's the management takeaway. Normalize both results and recovery. Celebrate achievement and sustainable ways of working. All right, dynamic number 4, uncertainty avoidance. And this is sort of a low to high scale. Uncertainty avoidance, how comfortable people are with ambiguity. Strengths of a high uncertainty avoidance culture includes planning, risk control, right? We don't like uncertainty. Planning, risk control. Okay, the risk or the downside to a high uncertainty avoidance culture or individual, they might be slower to execute in ambiguous situations where information and data are missing or incomplete. And again, this is not right or wrong. This is not normative. This is descriptive. It's a snapshot of what is, not what ought to be. Strengths of low uncertainty avoidance. In other words, these folks, these organizations, these cultures are good with ambiguity, often tend to be highly adaptable and highly innovative. And you see this a lot in startups where clear parameters and lines don't exist. Things are just a bit blurry, and that's good. We like to work in that space. Okay? Typical of startups. The risk, though, of uncertainty avoidance cultures, tendency to act on half-baked or underdeveloped strategies. Just get going and we'll figure it out as we go. Right? That would be typical of a low uncertainty avoidance. You're good with ambiguity. We'll figure it out as we go. So that's a risk for strategy and for sustainability, or from a legal compliance perspective, it can get you into some tough spots. So the management takeaway: define what must remain stable and what can be squishy and gray and flexible. Have those clear parameters. Ambiguity is easier when the guardrails around it are clear. Okay, and the fifth one, last but certainly not least, is long-term versus short-term orientation. Strengths for a long-term focus would be persistence, continuous learning, long-term investment of resources and infrastructure. Risks of a long-term focus could be slower wins, often shifting current priorities. Okay. Strengths of a short-term focus, on the other hand, is execution and urgency. Things happen now. The risks associated with short-term focus would be quick fix band-aid maintenance on systems and processes. Right? And again, this isn't about right or wrong, good or bad. This is just different, and then how do we manage within that? So the manager takeaway for that domain would be connect today's metrics with tomorrow's outcomes. Okay? People commit more readily when they can see the line between the current effort and the future payoff. Okay, so that's a whole mouthful right at you. But here's the boil down. Culture isn't an aspiration we hang on a wall. I'm going to say that again. Culture is not an aspiration we hang on a wall. Culture is determined by how we recruit, how we hire, how we reward. Culture is determined by what and how we incentivize. And for better or worse, culture is determined in the behaviors that we quietly tolerate and even celebrate. The best managers don't try to fix culture. Rather, they understand it, they recognize it, and they design around it. There you go. Agree? Disagree? Or somewhere in between. As always, I hope that helps. And if nothing else, I hope it has at least been food for thought. Follow me for more.